Yet this is what Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and all his young global leaders are all about. He groomed and planted all these young global leaders around the world, and they do the bidding of Klaus. And the gang is advancing his sick, twisted, evil globalist agenda, as you can see here.
So what is the World Economic Forum? It's the oligarchs who meet in that luxury town of Davos to scheme about their plans for your world. They're the ones who talk about the Great Reset all the time, the ones who fly on private jets but tell you that you can't even drive a car. They're the ones who tell you to eat bugs while they dine on steaks. They're the ones who say you'll own nothing and you'll be happy while they gobble up billions of dollars. They're the ones who believe in transhumanism, into hacking human beings and controlling them.
By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself.
That's just creepy. But their influence is everywhere. Politicians in every country seem to take their talking points from the WEF. Take a look.
And build it back better.
It's my plan to build back better.
Build back better.
Building back better our economy.
Build back better.
All elements of the Great Reset are fundamental to building the future we need.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
So who is the World Economic Forum? And why do they talk like that? Who is their boss? Klaus Schwab, who looks and sounds like a James Bond supervillain.
The effect will be much similar to World War, and actually all countries in the world are affected.
And why does Justin Trudeau go there so often? What does he talk about with George Soros when they meet there? Politicians in every country are loyal to the World Economic Forum. What's that all about?
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. Mm-hmm. I'm here with the president, who is a young global leader.
Well, this is a bit awkward. During a debate in the Canadian Parliament, MP Colin Carey asked a pretty inconvenient question. And as you'll see for yourself, it wasn't exactly welcomed.
I had a constituent that wanted me to ask a question about outside interference to our democracy. Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum, and he bragged how his subversive WEF, World Economic Forum, has, quoted, infiltrated governments around the world. He said that his organization had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet. And I was wondering, in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda? My concern is the deputy.
Order. I know that the member was in a really good question there, but the audio is really bad.
The audio was bad. It sounded fine to me, but it wasn't enough for Carey just to be silenced. He had to be discredited too.
The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, that member is promoting open disinformation. That's not debate. We have to call it disinformation.
We'll get into debate again.
Disinformation. So it's disinformation to say that Klaus Schwab has openly bragged about the World Economic Forum infiltrating, or in his own words, penetrating governments. No, it isn't. Here's Klaus Schwab saying precisely that.
To say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, president of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets,
Yeah, Dr. Strangelove 2.0 is quite proud of penetrating the cabinets in Canada. In fact, Diverge Media has found at least a dozen Canadians in a position of influence who are on the forum for young global leaders created by the World Economic Forum. Is that disinformation too? These profiles are all taken directly from the younggloballeaders.org website. So no, it's not disinformation, it's completely true. You're the only one engaging in disinformation by claiming it isn't. Bear in mind that 3 years after Schwab's boast, he said directly that the pandemic represented a, quote, opportunity for a great reset. Now, I seem to remember someone else saying something quite similar.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
And if we're to judge by the behaviour of the Trudeau regime, the Great Reset will be achieved with the aid of police using horses to trample people in walkers and wheelchairs who protest against it. But I guess that's all just disinformation too, right?
Somewhere else it seems to be sliding into dictatorship is Holland, which may not entirely be a coincidence. The similarities between Canada and Holland are as startling as they are disturbing. Here's Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, leader of the laughably and ironically named People's Party for Freedom and Democracy. Apart from obviously sharing the same wacky lefty sense of humour, those two both are, of course, golden pin-up boys for Klaus Schwab and the globalist fantasists of the World Economic Forum. Only a few months ago, it was the Canadian government that attacked its own citizens in the most grotesque and terrifyingly authoritarian manner during the so-called truckers' convoy revolts, when the government actually froze the bank accounts and basically starved out any individuals involved in what was legitimate, peaceful, democratic opposition to COVID mandates. That ended badly for Trudeau, particularly after this shameful incident in which Canadian mounted police trampled over a peaceful woman protester.
Come on through. What is happening here? Wow, what is this lady doing? Trampling horses. Stop it. Stop it. Oh my God. They just trampled this lady. They just trampled that lady.
Hang on. I've seen something like that before, haven't I? Reminds me of something. Oh, yes, Melbourne, under Dan Andrews.
Media! Media! Media!
But I digress. Let's go back to Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte at the World Economic Forum in Davos last year, boasting about Holland's involvement with the World Economic Forum's global food innovation hubs, which is busily, quote, transforming food systems and land use.
I'd like to highlight a World Economic Forum initiative in this regard, the World Economic Forum Food Innovation Hubs. And these hubs in Africa, in Asia, in South America and in Europe will allow businesses to connect regional stakeholders to skill innovations, because this is key, skill innovations that can address food systems challenges. And here, I'm particularly proud to announce that the Netherlands will host the Global Coordinating Secretariat of the World Economic Forum Food Innovation Hubs.
The hubs are set out to transform food systems and land use, eh? I wonder what that means exactly. Well, your guess is as good as mine, but as I mentioned last night, currently the Dutch government is embarked upon insane efforts to slash greenhouse gases and reduce the amount of nitrogen ammonia in the soil by 30 to 70% by 2030, or even by up to 95% in some places, in order to meet green EU climate change targets that Holland has signed up to. And this means literally turfing people off their farms. I guess that's one way to transform land use and food systems, eh, Rutte? Well, the Netherlands House of Representatives has released a statement which said, quote, "The honest message is that not all farmers will continue in business. Those who do will have to farm differently." Wow, just think about that. But everyday, hard-working Dutch family farmers and others are now involved in massive and growing protests, hardly surprising, with tractor blockades, manure being dumped on government buildings or places, and there are accusations of the Dutch secret police infiltrating the protesters, the same playbook used by Trudeau, allegedly. What a coincidence. And overnight, there are even accusations of shots being fired. This, by the way, is what happens when your national government gets penetrated by globalist activists from the World Economic Forum. Oh, does that sound like a conspiracy theory? Yes, it does. But alas, it's not me saying it. It's dear old Klaus Schwab back in 2017 fessing up to what the World Economic Forum is really up to.
I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on. They all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Mm-hmm.
But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
What does the everyday average woman, man, child, how do they fight this? How do they stop this,
So one of the things we've tried to do, and I've invested thousands of dollars in this, we're teamed with a group in Sweden that's about to come out with a book on the World Economic Forum. It's currently in Dutch. So we've got to get it translated into English and available in the United States. But what we've done is compiled a massive spreadsheet of World Economic Forum trainees, because they are everywhere. They're all over in American industry, government, big media, tech, okay? The starting point is people need to know who they're dealing with. We need to out these people. I mean, the term is used, doxing. As far as I'm concerned with these folks, doxing is good. Let's go get them.
And that's also what we're doing in this documentary. We're going and getting them and outing and doxing them so we can know what and who we're up against. It's a global coordinated effort from Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and COVID, admittedly, was their time to strike and put all their evil, global, sick, twisted plans into place. And when Schwab laughed and admitted he's got his, quote, puppets in place, secreted around the world, he wasn't joking, folks. What you just saw was the tip of the iceberg as this researcher continues. Quote, "How is it that more than 190 governments from around the world end up dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic in almost exactly the same manner, with the lockdowns, the mask mandates, the vaccination cards now being commonplace everywhere?" The answer lies with the Young Global Leaders School, which was established and managed by Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and that many of today's prominent political and business leaders pass through on their way to the top. The story begins with the World Economic Forum, which is a NGO or non-governmental organization founded by Klaus Schwab, a German economist and mechanical engineer in Switzerland in 1971 when he was only 32 years old. The World Economic Forum is best known for the public annual conferences that it holds in Davos, Switzerland each January that aim to bring together political and business leaders from around the world to discuss the problems of the day. Today, it's one of the most important networks of the world for the globalist power elite, being funded by approximately 1,000 multinational corporations, and the World Economic Forum, which was originally called the European Management Forum until 1987, succeeded in bringing together, listen, 440 executives from 31 nations already at its very first meeting back in 1971. Which was an unexpected achievement for somebody like Schwab, who had very little international or professional experience prior to this. Now, the reason may be due to the contacts Schwab made during his university education, including studying with no less than a person from the former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. While Schwab was there, the Harvard Business School had been in the process of planning a management forum of their own, and it's possible that Harvard ended up delegating that task of organizing it to him, i.e. Schwab. The forum initially only brought together people from the economic realm, but before long it began attracting politicians, prominent figures from the media, including from BBC and CNN, and even celebrities. And in 1992, Schwab established a parallel institution called the Global Leaders for Tomorrow School, which he reestablished as Young Global Leaders in 2004. The attendees at the school must apply for admission and are then subjected to a rigorous selection process. Members of the school's very first class in 1992 already included many who went to become prominent liberal political figures such as Angela Merkel, Nicolas Sarkozy, Tony Blair, to mention others. There are currently, 1,300 graduates of the school, and the list of alumni includes several names of those who went on to become leaders of health institutions, of the respective nations, including former and current health ministers. Other notable names on the school's roster are Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, whose stringent lockdown measures have been praised by global health authorities. You got Emmanuel Macron, the President of France. You got Sebastian Kurz, who was until recently the Chancellor of Austria. You got Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. Jean-Claude Juncker, former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, the President of the European Commission. Annalena Baerbock, the leader of the German Greens, who was the party's first candidate for chancellor in this year's federal election. We also find, California Governor Gavin Newsom on the list, who was selected for the class of 2005, as well as former presidential candidate and U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, who is a very recent alumni, having selected for the class of 2019. All these politicians who were in office during the past 2 years have favored harsh responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, and which also happened to considerably increase their respective government's power over the people. But the school's list of alumni is not limited to political leaders. We also find many of the captains of private industry there as well, including Microsoft Bill Gates, Amazon Jeff Bezos, Virgin's Richard Branson, and the Clinton Foundation Chelsea Clinton. Again, all of them expressed support for the global response to the pandemic, and many reaped considerable profits as a result of those measures. The people behind the World Economic Forum and the global leaders that school are the ones who really determine who will, become political leaders. Let me read that again. The people behind the World Economic Forum and the Global Leaders School are the ones who really determine who will become political leaders. And the school's alumni include not only Americans, not only Europeans, but people also from Asia, Africa, South America, indicating, quote, its reach is truly worldwide. Again, I mentioned Nicolas Sarkozy. You got people like Bono. You got Jorma Olia, Shell Oil. You got Jose Manuel Barroso, President of the European Commission for 10 years. You got Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden, Crown Prince Haakon of Norway, Crown Prince of Frederick of Denmark. All these come from Casa School. Prince Jeremy Borden in the Netherlands, Prince Rami Al Saud, Ambassador to Saudi Arabia in the USA. You got Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand. Alexander De Croo, Prime Minister of Belgium. You got Sanna Martin, Prime Minister of Finland. You got Carlos Quezada, President of Costa Rica. You got Faisal Al-Ibrahim, Minister of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia. You got Shana Amith, Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Technology in the Maldives. You got Ida Auken, former Minister of Environment in Denmark. You got, again, Annalena Baerbock, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Germany. Kamisa Kamara, the Minister of Digital Economy and Planning in Mali. You got Eugen Georgi, Minister of Domestic Affairs in Bhutan. You got Chrystia Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in Canada. You got Martin Guzman, Minister of Finance in Argentina. You got Mohammed Azhar, Minister of Energy in Pakistan. You got Paula Ingerbir, Minister of Information and Communications Technology and Innovation in Rwanda. You got Ronald Lamola, Minister of Justice and Correctional Services in South Africa. You got Birgitta Olsen, Minister of European Affairs in Sweden. Mona Sahlin, Party Leader of the Social Democrats in Sweden. You got Stav Shafir, Leader of the Green Party in Israel. You got Vera Davis de Souza, Minister of France in Angola. You got people like Leonardo DiCaprio, climate activist, actor guy. You got Matthias Klum, photographer and environmentalist. You got Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba. Larry Page, founder of Google. We already saw Sergey Brin. Rick Patel, founder of Avaz. David Rothschild, a venture environmentalist. Jimmy Whale, founder of Wikipedia. Jacob Wallenberg, chairman of Investor. Nicholas Zinstrom, founder of Skype. And shocker, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook. And folks, that's just the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg of the graduates of Klaus's school. But all these people and more are, quote, advancing a future-orientated global agenda. Can I translate that for you? They're all working for Klaus. They're implementing his sick, twisted, satanic, Hitlerian nightmare. But then in 2012, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic founded yet another institution. This one they called the Global Shapers Community, which brings together those identified by them as having leadership potential from around the world who are under 30. So now he's going after the young, just like Hitler did with the youth. Approximately 10,000 participants have passed through this program to date, and they regularly hold meetings in 400 cities. This is yet another proving ground where future political leaders are being selected, vetted, and groomed before they get positioned in the world's political apparatus. Given the growing discontent with the anti-COVID measures put into place by the school's graduates, who are now national leaders, it is possible that these people were selected due to their willingness to do whatever they're told, and that they are being set up to fail so that the subsequent backlash can be exploited to justify the creation of a new global form of government. And this has been especially evident in most countries' response to the pandemic, where politicians who knew nothing about viruses 2 years ago suddenly proclaimed that COVID was a severe health crisis. And they justified it by locking people up in their homes, shutting down their businesses, and wrecking their entire economies. The World Economic Forum's Board of Trustees includes also such luminaries as Christine Lagarde, former managing director of the International Monetary Fund and president of the European Central Bank. You also got Queen Rania of Jordan, who has been ranked by Forbes as one of the most 100 most powerful women in the world. You got Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, the largest investment management corporation internationally, which handles approximately $9 trillion annually. The ultimate conclusion, they say, one must draw from all of this is that, listen, democracy as we know it has been silently canceled, and that although the appearance of a democratic process is being maintained in our countries, the fact is that an examination of how governments around the world works today shows that an elite of super wealthy and powerful individuals effectively control everything that goes on in politics, and has been especially evident in relation to the pandemic response. And again, folks, that is true for the United States of America, unfortunately. But they say this: the best way to combat their designs is to simply educate people about what is happening, and for them to realize that the narrative of this super danger virus is a lie that has been designed to manipulate them into accepting things that run contrary to their own interests. If even, listen, 10% of ordinary citizens become aware of this and decide to take action, it could thwart the elite's plans and perhaps open a window for ordinary citizens to take back control over their own destinies. And again, this is another reason why we're doing this documentary, to educate you and get as many as you can around the world equipped on what these sick, evil, twisted megamaniacs are doing. And again, for those of you here in America wondering, yes, Joe Biden too is in on this. He's clearly working for Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. And we saw this from the very beginning when he announced his campaign slogan, remember? Build back better. And he also used another phrase that he used to scare us into voting for him. We are headed for a dark winter. Remember that? Remember those phrases? Folks, both of them come from the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. Okay? Other puppets would also include Ukrainian President Zelensky, which tells you this whole Russia-Ukraine issue is being used by these same globalists to further their sick agenda. And they're so bold in their global takeover since COVID that they even bluntly warn us, and I quote, hand over your sovereignty to the elite or die. And I quote, World Economic Forum henchman Yuval Noah Harari warned humanity that if they refuse to hand their sovereignty over to the elite, they will face extermination. They really think, folks, they've got us now, and that there's nothing we can do to stop them, which is not true, by the way. And we'll expose that lie in a greater detail, Lord willing, in our next documentary. Now, but lest you think this is some wacky conspiracy theory, that this is all just crazy, folks, this is all clearly broadcasted on their own website, as seen here, okay, where you can search their whole big giant database of World Economic Forum's young global leaders, and you can see where they're operating as we speak, in your area, in your country, all over the planet. And this is why we're treating this like this. Here's how every single government of the westernized world said, I love you. They're all in on it together, folks. Okay? And this is why they're all speaking the same language. Quote, this is when you know your country is in trouble when your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is paraphrasing Hitler. As you can see with the phrase, why do we tolerate these people taking up space? Hitler said that, folks. This is also why they keep getting elected. Quote, what a coincidence that the chosen leaders of the World Economic Forum keep winning elections even though they're absolutely despised by all their citizens. Yeah, why is that? It's because it's all rigged. And this is why any new positions that come up in the governments around the world, they're filled with World Economic Forum plants, like the latest one in the UK. Quote, coup complete, globalist Rishi Sunak installed as Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. And, quote, the free market experiment is over, time for a reset, with Sunak as Prime Minister, says top Tory. And I quote, the reset comments piqued particular interest, giving Sunak's connections to, here it is, to Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum, with Sunak's father-in-law, Narendra Murthy, the billionaire founder of India's tech giant Infosys, being listed as a partner of Davos-based group. Okay? In fact, this picture tells it all. Quote, the UK now has, watch this, a World Economic Forum king, a World Economic Forum prime minister, a World Economic Forum government, a World Economic Forum leader position, and a World Economic Forum opposition party, and shocker, a World Economic Forum media. And don't think this Klaus Schwab and World Economic Forum infiltration escaped the United States. We just saw, after 15 tries, Kevin McCarthy finally getting appointed as the Republican Speaker of the House. But as you can see here, folks, he too, shocker, has direct ties and connections with the World Economic Forum. Now you know why they kept trying to vote him in after repeated failed attempts more than ever in all of U.S. history. They had to get their World Economic Forum guy in place. And this is also why the World Economic Forum has argued in favor of governments implementing socialist-style policies such as wealth taxes and the green agenda. Following the outbreak of the Chinese coronavirus pandemic, founder Klaus Schwab argued that the governments around the world, quote, must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, and that there is a need for a, quote, great reset of capitalism. Sound familiar? This is why they were working all together to shut down any and all resistors, social media, bank accounts, your personal life, your transportation, land, all of it was threatened if you didn't go along with their agenda and narrative. Folks, the common thread is this: they're all working with Schwab. Do the research. And if you get in their way, or if you, let's say you have a change of heart, as one of the global leaders who got planted around the world, they're going to take you out. As you can see here with Japan's Prime Minister, quote, assassinated Japanese Prime Minister didn't follow World Economic orders. He didn't mandate vaccines, and he sent back 1.6 million doses and gave his citizens ivermectin. Well, you can't have that in Klaus's new world. You've always wondered why certain political leaders around the world end up dying or suddenly get forced out of office. Either go along with Klaus and his sick, evil, twisted, dystopian vision for the planet and be a good, trained, and young, groomed global leader or puppet as he says, or you can kiss your career and life goodbye. Folks, these people are sick. They're sick, they're murderous, they're satanic just like Hitler. Go figure, given Klaus's background and hello where he grew up. Okay, but that's not all. You also get taken out if you don't go along with the Ukraine issue and support President Zelensky over there, as you can see here. And by the way, this is why these same people are promoting that conflict. As you can see, COVID was just beginning, but it only got them so far. So you got to stir up some trouble, in this case, Ukraine, and voila. You can, it will lead to a war, and you can keep using that as an excuse to manipulate people with this crisis, just like you did with the planned crisis with COVID, to further your evil, wicked agenda. And eventually, all these crises will lead to an economic one, so you could use that to usher in your great reset, your planetary takeover, and make yourselves look like the savior of the planet, when in fact you planned the whole thing from the beginning. It's sick, it's evil, it's deceptive, it's twisted. That is all this is, folks. Just like Satan, just like Hitler. And this is also why this gentleman warned this. Watch this. And I quote, no matter how paranoid or conspiracy-minded you are, what the government is actually doing is worse than you can imagine. And it's all because, as you can see here, they are carefully, strategically, methodically working together as groups and think tanks and entities all over the world to slowly but surely take over the world, the whole planet, using generated crises as the tool to get the job done, as this video shows.
A new partnership of nations has begun, and we stand today at a unique and extraordinary moment. The crisis in the Persian Gulf, as grave as it is, also offers a rare opportunity to move toward an historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace.
What pleasure to be together again and to design the future. We are here to develop the great narrative, a story for the future. In order to shape the future, you have first to imagine the future, you have to design the future, and then you have to execute. Here, I think the next 2 days, we will look how we imagine, how we design, how we execute the great narratives, how we define the story of our world for the future.
Well, look, I think it's going to be, we're going to make a deal. We always make a deal. But it's going to be a different kind of deal because it's got to be a deal that respects the values that in the new world order regarding...
One of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway.
I think there were two different State of the Union addresses. Yeah. The first one was the State of the New World Order, and he was talking about bringing unity to all the people around the globe and the countries around the globe and NATO and all that and what we could do if we were unified.
You heard Secretary Blinken essentially say, look, sanctions relief could happen. It all depends on the behavior of Russia. Can we really live in a world where Putin's let back into the New World Order?
Well, that's not what I heard him say. What I heard him say was that really we are going to support the Ukrainians, the people and the government of Ukraine, as they try to figure out what for them is the best way forward. And that, I think, is exactly the right position for the United States, Europe, and the West, and other countries to take. Your second part of that question, though, is a really important one. I would not allow Russia back into the organizations that it has been a part of. I think there's an upcoming G20 event later in the year. I would not permit Russia to attend, and if they insisted on literally showing up, I would hope there would be a significant, if not total, boycott.
For the rest of us that aren't Ukrainians, I think the world, quite frankly, Kira, is surprised by the will of the Ukrainian people to stand up and fight. Are you?
Well, I'm not surprised. We have been fighting Putin for the last 8 years, and we had 3 revolutions in our country when we did not agree with what was going on with the direction of where we're moving in. But right now, it's a critical time because we know that we not only fight for Ukraine, we fight for this new world order.
What underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was very privileged. My father was an advisor to Nixon when they came off the gold standard in '71, and so I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. And the new one, the new accounting, is what we call blockchain. It means digital. It means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on. It also raises huge dangers in terms of the balance of power between states and citizens. In my opinion, we're going to need a digital constitution of human rights if we're going to have digital money. But also, this new money will be sovereign in nature. Most people think that digital money is crypto and private, but what I see are superpowers introducing digital currency. The Chinese were the first. The US is on the brink, I think, of moving in the same direction. The Europeans have committed to that as well. And the question is, will that new system of digital money and digital accounting accommodate the competing needs of the citizens of all these locations so that every human being has a chance to have a better life? Because that's the only measure of whether a world order really serves.
And the title of this session, are we ready for a new world order?
It seems extraordinary when we could be supplying all of Europe, all of Germany, and all of Europe with our liquefied natural gas, and this dilemma would not be faced. But I think the larger perspective that we all need to think about some, and you brought it up earlier in the newscast, Brett, is this new alliance between Russia and China, this new world order that they are talking about.
Someone like Vladimir Putin has now upset this balance of the new world order that they were trying to achieve by going into Ukraine. And I'm probably the last person that's going to be a Putin apologist. I won't be, but what I do understand are the dynamics that are playing out in Ukraine right now. And I sent you something earlier, Clay, and we don't need to go into the details of it, but all of what we are seeing play out in Europe right now is an upsetting of the balance of the world order as they want it, as people like Dr. Harari, as people like Klaus Schwab and others. Bill Gates is another one. So we have to understand that these are people that are very smart, they're very well resourced, and they have a very sort of strategic idea of how they want to see the world develop. And God and a soul are not part of that strategy.
And that's why God calls it the Antichrist, or opposer of Christ's kingdom. These guys are building the evil satanic empire that God warned about would come on the planet, the whole planet, nearly 2,000 years ago. But that's not all. The second way that Klaus Schwab pulled off this sick, twisted dystopian nightmare for all of our futures, whether we want it or not, is he grabbed control of not only the world leaders, but even the world finances. And folks, I mean all of them. You've heard the phrase, he who makes the golden rules. Well, in this case, he who owns the gold owns the world and then makes up the rules. And that's precisely what Klaus Schwab and his evil gang of global elites and global graduates have done. They own just about everything on the whole planet, folks. And if you think I'm kidding, I am not. Watch this.
I think by now you have the feeling that something is not right about our current situation. Less than a handful of megacorporations dominate every aspect of our lives. That may seem like an exaggeration, but from the breakfast that's on the table in the morning, to the mattress we sleep on at night, and everything we do, put on, or consume in between, all are largely dependent on these corporations. These are investment companies of immense proportions, and they manage the major money flows on Earth. They are the protagonists of the play which we are currently witnessing. So as not to take up too much of your time, I've summarized the most important information as briefly as possible. How does it work? Let's take as an example a company like PepsiCo, which is the parent company of many of the most popular soft drinks and snacks in the world. There appear to be many different competing brands, but they all come from the factories of a small number of corporations that together have a monopoly on the industry. Within the packaged food industry, there are a number of other major companies, such as Unilever, the Coca-Cola Company, Mondelez, and Nestlé. On this image, you see that virtually every well-known brand in the packaged food industry belongs to one of these corporations. You can easily get this kind of information. You can verify it on the websites of the relevant brands or on Wikipedia. Companies of this size are usually publicly traded and have a board where the largest shareholders call the shots. On websites like Yahoo Finance, we can find detailed company information, including who the largest shareholders of these companies are. Let's take PepsiCo again as an example. We see that 73.14% of the shares are held by no less than 3,379 institutional investors. These include investment companies, mutual funds, insurance companies, banks, and in some cases, governments. Let's look at who the largest institutional investors of PepsiCo are. As you can see, just 10 out of the 3,379 investors account for almost 1/3 of all shares. The combined share capital of these top 10 has a value of approximately $60 billion. But of those 10 investors, 3 own more shares than the remaining 7. Let's remember their names and let's see who owns the most shares at the Coca-Cola Company, Pepsi's big competitor. We see that just like with PepsiCo, the majority of the shares are held by institutional investors. Let's look at the top 10 and start with the last one of them. 4 out of these 6 institutional investors we also saw at the last 6 of PepsiCo. These are Norton Trust, JP Morgan Chase, Geody Capital Management, and Wellington Management. Now, let's look at the 4 largest shareholders. 3 of these we also saw in the top 4 at PepsiCo. They are BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And there's another one, Berkshire Hathaway. These are the 4 largest investment companies on the planet. PepsiCo and Coca-Cola are anything but competitors. But also the other big companies that own many brands, such as Unilever, Mondelez, and Nestlé, are owned by the same small group of institutional investors. And you don't only find these names in the packaged food industry. For example, let's look up on Wikipedia what the largest companies are within the technology industry. Facebook owns WhatsApp and Instagram. Together with Twitter, they form the most popular social media platforms in the world. Alphabet is the parent company of all Google businesses, including YouTube and Gmail, but they are also the biggest sponsors and developers of Android, one of the two operating systems on which almost all smartphones and tablets in the world run. The other operating system is Apple's iOS. Finally, if we add Microsoft to the other three, we see that 4 companies produce the software that almost all computers, tablets and smartphones in the world depend on. Let's see who owns the most shares of these powerful companies. If we look at Facebook, we see that more than 80% of the shares are owned by institutional investors. These are the same names we saw in the food industry. Again, the same investors at the top. Then Twitter, which with Facebook and Instagram makes up the top 3. Amazingly, we see that the company is also owned by the same investors. We see them at Apple, but also with their big competitor Microsoft. When we look at all the other companies that dominate the technology industry and build our computers, TVs, smartphones and household appliances, we see the same big investors who own a majority of the shares. We see this within all industries around the world. And just to show you that I'm not exaggerating, I'll give you another example. Let's say we want to plan a vacation. On our computer or smartphone, we look for a cheap flight to the sun through websites like Skyscanner and Expedia, both of which belong to the same group of institutional investors. We fly with one of the many airlines of which the majority of the shares are often owned by the same investors or by governments, like Air France-KLM. The aircraft we fly is in most cases a Boeing or an Airbus. Again, we see the same names. We look for a hotel or an apartment through Booking.com or Airbnb.com. Once we arrive at our destination, we go out for dinner, then we write a review on TripAdvisor. The same investors are at the basis of every aspect of our journey, and their power goes even much further, because even the kerosene that fuels the plane comes from one of their many oil companies and refineries. Just like the steel that the plane is made of comes from one of their many mining companies. This small club of investment companies, banks and mutual funds are also the largest shareholders in the primary industries, where raw materials come from. If we look on Wikipedia for the largest mining companies in the world, we see that their shareholders are the same institutional investors we see everywhere else. The same goes for the largest agricultural companies in the world, that our entire food industry depends on. For example, they own Bayer, the parent company of Monsanto, the world's largest seed producer, which produces 90% of all the cotton seed on Earth, as well as the majority of all other seeds. But these institutional investors are also the shareholders of the largest textile manufacturing companies in the world, and even the numerous popular clothing brands that turn the cotton into the clothes we wear are owned by the same group of investors. Whether we have the world's largest solar panel producers or the largest oil refineries, the shares are managed by the same companies. They own the tobacco companies, who produce all the popular tobacco brands in the world. But they also own all the major companies in the pharmaceutical industry and the scientific institutes that produce the drugs. They own the companies that produce our metals and raw materials, and the entire automobile, aircraft and arms industry where those metals and raw materials are processed. They own the companies that build our electronics, They own the big department stores and online marketplaces. And even the payment methods that we use to pay for their products. Because I want to keep my story as short as possible, I've decided to only show the tip of the iceberg. If you decide to investigate on your own, using the sources that you've just seen, then you will discover that even many of the most well-known insurance companies, banks, construction companies, telephone companies, restaurant chains, and cosmetic brands are owned by the same institutional investors we just saw. These institutional investors are, as I told you earlier, mainly investment companies, banks and insurance companies. They are in turn also owned by shareholders. Now, what is the most amazing thing? All of these institutional investors own each other's shares, and together they form an immense network that we can compare to a pyramid. The smaller institutional investors are owned by larger investors, who in turn belong to even larger investors. The visible top of this pyramid consists of only two companies, and we have seen their names many times by now. They are Vanguard and BlackRock. The power of these two companies is something we can barely imagine. Not only are they the largest institutional investors of every major company on Earth, they also own the other institutional investors of those companies, giving them a complete monopoly. According to a report by Bloomberg, one of the most respected institutions in the world in the field of financial data and analytics, experts expect that by 2028 both companies will collectively manage about $20 trillion in investments, and in the process will own almost everything on Earth. The same Bloomberg called BlackRock the fourth arm of government, because it is the only non-government entity that has a close relationship with the federal banks, also called the central banks. BlackRock not only lends money to the federal banks, but is also their principal advisor and the developer of the computer system that the federal banks use. Dozens of BlackRock employees had senior positions in the White House during the Bush and the Obama administrations, and currently under Joe Biden. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink is a welcome guest with many heads of state and politicians, and understandably so. He's the face of the company that pulls the strings. Yet Larry Fink does not pull the strings himself. In fact, BlackRock itself is owned by shareholders. And if we look at who those shareholders are, we come to a strange conclusion. We see that BlackRock's largest shareholder is Vanguard, and this is where it gets dark. Vanguard itself has a unique structure that makes it impossible to see who its shareholders or clients are. The elite who own Vanguard don't want anyone to know that they are the owners of the most powerful company on Earth. But of course, this is no secret to those who are willing to look into it. Reports by Oxfam and Bloomberg show that 1% of the world's population collectively owns more money than the other 99%. Indeed, Oxfam claims that as much as 82% of all the money earned in 2017 went to this 1% of people. Naturally, those who own the most powerful company on Earth would also be the richest among this 1%. In other words, they are part of the 0.001%. Forbes, the most well-known business magazine in the world, claims that by March 2020 there were some 2,075 billionaires. Oxfam's report showed that 2/3 of all these billionaires obtained their fortune through inheritances and monopolies. So this means that Vanguard is in the hands of the richest families on Earth. If we study their history, we discover that these families have always belonged to the top of the pyramid, some even well before the Industrial Revolution began. Because their history is so interesting and extensive, I will explain some more about them in the follow-up video that I'm currently working on. But in order not to elaborate too far, I will just point out that many of these families belong to royal bloodlines, and they are the founders of our banking system, the United Nations, and every industry in the world. These families never lost their power, but because of an increasing world population, they were forced to hide behind investment companies such as Vanguard, whose largest shareholders are the private funds and non-profit organizations of these families. To make the bigger picture more clear, I need to briefly explain something about these non-profit organizations. These are the links that connect the business community with politics and the media, allowing major conflicts of interest. At first glance, however, this is not too noticeable. Non-profits, also called foundations, are organizations that rely on donations, and they do not have to publish from whom they receive those donations. They can invest this money in whatever they want, and do not have to pay tax on their profits as long as those profits are reinvested in other projects that they are involved in. Non-profits can move hundreds of billions of dollars from invisible investors. According to a report by the Australian government, this makes non-profit organizations ideal to finance terrorist groups and launder large sums of money. The foundations and funds of the families who are highest in the hierarchy of the 1% hide behind the scenes as much as possible. However, for cases that have a lot of publicity and attention, they use the foundations of philanthropist families that are lower in the ranking, but who are also extremely wealthy. In order to be concise, I will only highlight the 3 most important foundations in the world that connect all the industries in the world to each other. These are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundations of the controversial multi-billionaire George Soros, and the Clinton Foundation. A very brief introduction to give you an idea of the size of these types of foundations. According to the official website of the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation is the largest funder of the World Health Organization, after President Donald Trump halted the funding of the WHO by the US in 2020. This makes the Gates Foundation one of the most influential organizations in the world in the area of everything that relates to our health. The Gates Foundation has a close partnership with the 16 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, including Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, BioNTech, and Bayer, and we have just seen who own the most shares of these companies. Bill Gates was anything but a poor computer nerd who made it to one of the richest people in the world. But he came from a philanthropic family that, just like himself, worked for the absolute elite. Bill is the founder of Microsoft, which is owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, and until recently, Berkshire Hathaway. But at the same time, the Gates Foundation is the largest shareholder after BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street in Berkshire Hathaway, where he was even on the board for a while. We would spend hours if we considered everything the Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundations of George Soros, and the Clinton Foundation are involved in. But because they connect us with the next topic and with the current events, this brief introduction was important. I think the next topic should start with a question. A random person like myself, with very little experience in video editing, using an old laptop, can in 20 minutes objectively portray that only 2 companies have a total monopoly over all the industries in the world. So the natural question is, Why don't you hear about all of this in the media?
What? It's a good question.
Every day we have the choice between countless reports, documentaries and television programs, and yet not one of them talks about this. Is it something not interesting enough? Or might there perhaps be other interests at play? The answer we get again from Wikipedia. About 90% of the international media is owned by 9 media conglomerates. The companies owned by these media conglomerates are too many to mention, so I'm just going to show you the most important brands that we all know. Viacom CBS is the parent company of, among others, all CBS channels, Paramount, where the most famous movies and series in the world come from, MTV, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, the popular British Channel 5 and the popular Australian 10. Guess who the largest shareholders of Viacom CBS are? Before we look at the other major conglomerates, let's not forget to mention our extremely powerful streaming monopolists, Netflix and Amazon Prime, both of which belong to the same shareholders. Then AT&T, which is the parent company of Warner Brothers, HBO, Discovery Channel, CNN, Cartoon Network, TNT, DC, and many other well-known brands. Guess who the largest shareholders of AT&T are? The third one is the all-powerful News Corp. This company owns many of the most well-known national and regional newspapers, magazines and TV channels in the US, the UK and Australia. The shares of News Corp are owned by the American multi-billionaire Rupert Murdoch and by the institutional investors we see everywhere else. News Corp's sister company is Fox Corporation, which is also one of the most powerful media conglomerates on Earth. Just like News Corp, it is owned by the Murdoch family and the usual investors. Then the Walt Disney Company, a conglomerate of unimaginable dimensions, with many subsidiaries such as Pixar, Marvel, 20th Century, Lucasfilm, ABC, National Geographic, and Hulu. Who are their biggest shareholders? Another powerful media conglomerate is Comcast. This is the parent company of NBC, DreamWorks, Universal, the Sky Group, Focus Features, Xfinity, and many other major media brands. As you would expect, their largest shareholders are Vanguard and BlackRock. I could go on for hours and show that in almost every country on Earth, the local media is in the hands of these kind of conglomerates, which in turn are owned by our institutional investors or by extremely rich and powerful elite families. In the UK, for example, virtually all popular newspapers and magazines are owned by the Daily Mail Group, Reach and the aforementioned News Corp. In the Netherlands, the entire media is in the hands of the Persgroep, Mediahuis and Bertelsmann. And in Germany, the entire media is either controlled by the German government, ProSiebenSat.1, Axel Springer, and again, Bertelsmann, which is also a conglomerate of unprecedented dimensions. Not only is this the parent company of the largest book publisher in the world, Penguin Random House, and owner and founder of BMG Music, Bertelsmann also controls a large part of the European media through their subsidiary RTL, a company with 67 TV channels, 10 streaming platforms and 38 radio stations. Bertelsmann is owned by the ultra-rich Bertelsmann-Mohn family, who openly collaborated with the Nazis. Because of this, Reinhard Mohn was held as a prisoner of war in the US. Besides RTL, Bertelsmann also owns a large part of the French mainstream media. And together with Mediaset, the powerful Italian conglomerate of former President Berlusconi that controls the most important part of the Italian mainstream media, they also own all popular Spanish TV channels. Now, to complete the picture, let's look at where the news comes from that all these media outlets are feeding us on a daily basis. The various news media do not produce their news themselves, but use information and images from news agencies such as Reuters, the Dutch ANP, and the French AFP. These organizations are anything but independent. Reuters is owned by the powerful Canadian Thomson family. The ANP is owned by Dutch investor Kees Omen, and the AFP is largely financed by the French government. The main journalists and editors who work at our media or at these news agencies are affiliated with important journalistic organizations, such as the European Journalism Centre. These are one of the largest funders of media-related projects across Europe. They train journalists, produce study materials, give internships at, for example, the ANP, and work closely with the world's largest corporations such as Google and Facebook. For journalistic analysis and opinion, all the major media outlets in the world use Project Syndicate, the most powerful organization within its field. It supplies the 506 most important media outlets in 156 countries. Project Syndicate, plus an organization such as the European Journalism Centre, together with the news agencies, are the connecting link between all the different media outlets around the world. When newscasters read the news from their teleprompters, there is a good chance that the text comes from one of these organizations. As a result, the global media is often synchronized in its reporting.
We are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 In September 2020, the European Journalism Centre and Facebook set up a fund to support selected news organizations to do the reporting during the corona crisis. Let's see who the organizations are that, along with the news agencies, produce our news. At Project Syndicate, we see the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, and the European Journalism Centre. Then the European Journalism Centre itself. Again we see the Gates Foundation and the Open Society Foundation. And they also receive large donations from Facebook, Google, the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, and from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The organizations that are at the heart of our information flow are funded by the non-profit organizations of the same elite who also controls the entire media. However, a part of our tax money goes to these organizations as well. The elite that controls every aspect of our lives, up to the information that we receive, depends on an unimaginably coordinated collaboration to keep all the different industries on Earth connected to each other, in order to ensure they all work in the elite's interests. This happens at the World Economic Forum, one of the most important organizations in the world. At its annual meeting in Davos, the CEOs of the largest companies on Earth gather along with heads of state, politicians, and other influential individuals and organizations like UNICEF and Greenpeace.